All right, guys, welcome everyone. Appreciate you coming into the webinar here as we discuss how to create a policies and procedures manual. So I do appreciate you joining us, and at the same time, I feel sorry for you because this means you are either in the process of updating yours or building one, or you are in charge of your firm's policies. So never an easy task, but we'll definitely jump into it today. So for those that don't know me, my name is Brian Hahn. I've been consulting at Tradecraft since 2009. I work just with SEC and FINRA registered firms, doing a wide array of intelligence contracting and cybersecurity consulting. Currently have over 200 clients, and when I work with them, I'm working as a brain trust, and I think that's important to know when we start out these webinars. I don't have any biases to IT vendors or services or anything like that. My only bias is to make sure you have what you need to get your network secure. And of course, we can show the SEC that we're doing that. So this is easily one of my least favorite things to do, is go through and craft the cybersecurity policies and procedures manual, just because it's tedious and there's no templated approach to it. So it works out great for you guys just because I hate it so much. I've spent a lot of time coming up with tips and tricks to make this a smooth process, and to make sure that we have a nice living document that can sit inside any SEC registered firm, essentially. So the main reason we're here is because we have 20649 coming down the pipeline, which is the SEC's new cybersecurity regulation. There's 225 pages of regulation, all of which can be summarized in these 2 pages from the SEC. Within those 225 pages, there is some descriptive language about how you should be building your cybersecurity policies and procedures manual, and talks about some of the different things that the SEC is going to be looking for. So that's what we want to talk about today. You've seen some of our other webinars. I focus a little more broadly on topics, and then as we kind of get closer to the regulation hitting, some of these are meant to be more specific and drilled in. So when I engage with a firm, I really come across 4 kind of big problems that I have to work with when I'm giving a cybersecurity policies and procedures manual. One is that it's just missing. A firm will be operating without having one. Even though I know a lot of firms might not technically be subject to regulation SIP, we should still be having a cybersecurity policies and procedures manual in place. One kind of note of clarity, I get asked this question pretty frequently, and I don't think it matters. It certainly doesn't matter for me, and I've never seen it matter in an SEC examination. But whether you want to keep a separate cybersecurity policies and procedures manual, which is what I do and what I recommend, or you have something already built and tied into your general compliance policies and procedures manual, I think both are fine. But just as long as you have something there and it's not missing. The second biggest problem I see is it's just a templated approach. The firm's downloaded 4 or 5 pages of a templated approach, and it talks about how they protect their cloud environment, but the firm doesn't even have a cloud environment. And we've seen from examinations that the SEC is going to tear those apart. Also come across firms that have a great document, but it's just being ignored. They have written out what they're doing to log and to do intrusion protection and vulnerability scanning and training, but they're not actually doing it. So the reality of what they're collecting compliance-wise and what they're putting in their policies and procedures manual just doesn't line up. And the fourth biggest problem I see, and this is really what we're going to focus on today, is people build a static document. And the problem with building a static cybersecurity policies and procedures manual is at the moment something changes, you have a new employee, or you have a new employee that goes remote, or you're adding a new service provider, everything has to change. So I always like to set up and build a document that is easy to update and easy to manage no matter what the firm goes through, whether we're switching infrastructure, hiring employees, or responding to an SEC audit. Most importantly, we want to have a document that really works with us and helps us with that. So 20649 has a couple mandatory topics that need to be covered in this new policies and procedures manual. One is doing a risk and threat assessment, and this is also including looking at your vendors. So understanding where sensitive information is, understanding where it may be at risk or assets may be at risk, and who may be after them. And also understanding just what your firm looks like to a potential attacker. All of these things are what the SEC will want to see in a risk of threat assessment, and we'll dive into these in a little bit more. Employee security and user access rights. This is going to be a big one. You know, making sure your employees only have access to the systems that they need and are kept out of systems that they don't. Accountants shouldn't have access to trading, and trading shouldn't have access to accounting, and so on and so forth. So how are we breaking that up, and how are we securing our employees' access to this sensitive data? They want to know about our information protection protocols and procedures. So, you know, again, where is the data, where are the assets, and what are we doing to actively protect that? And then, of course, just about every firm, I've done well over 200 audits. I don't think I've ever done a single firm where I didn't find a vulnerability of something of some sort that needed to be managed. So, you know, what is that process for your firm? How are you identifying network vulnerabilities, and how are you working through the remediation of those? And constantly tracking, including threat and intrusion detections. Of course, the response and recovery game. So, you know, this is going to be your general business continuity plan or cyber continuity plan, whatever you want to call it is fine. And this is kind of the same thing, whether you want to have a separate plan or just include this in your overall disaster recovery plan. I think either one flies during examination time. Of course, I'm no lawyer. I should always state that up front. So if you have your attorney telling you differently, always use their advice. And then last is the employee security training. So this is one that we've always seen requested from the SEC. If you follow that documentation that I put on the website where we track all the ongoing requests from the SEC, it's a great document to check out if you haven't. But you'll see in there frequently, they always want to see proof of employee cybersecurity training. So we'll dive into these things and talk a little bit more about them and some of the best ways that I see in putting them together. So before we jump into that, and I'm going to have a recording of this go around, and you guys can certainly have access to this information later. But I just posted up what a typical table of contents would look like for me. This is, you know, generally 8 sections are going to be the minimum, and then I'll build it out from there depending on what the firm's doing. If they're doing something exotic, cryptocurrency trading, building their own trading apps, doing some kind of unique cashiering, you know, we'll definitely address a section for that, or if they have custody of assets. But overall, this is what I like to see in a table of contents. You'll see in here some of these have exhibits on them, and the way I like to set up the policies and procedures is that when you're reading through and you're going through and you're seeing, okay, you know, list of systems containing PII, we can have the static document that describes how we collect that information, but then we have a living document in that exhibit that's constantly updated and easy for us to update no matter what happens. So in some ways, you're almost marrying a static document, you know, with your policies and procedures with living documents in your exhibits that add support to that document. So really what we're going to focus on today, there's a lot of stuff on here and we're not going to get to it, but the things I want to focus on today are the stuff that I really see firms struggle with or spend a lot of time on. And I'll just show you what I do with our clients. And, you know, for you do-it-yourselfers out there, I think you'll have enough information to take it and run with it. So the exhibits and how to create those, that's really what we're going to focus on today. So I use 2 products and I pay full retail for these. I'm in no way compensated by them. If you can find a cheaper, better solution out there, please let me know. Like they're expensive solutions, but ultimately they make this job of managing not only your policies and procedures manual, but your overall cybersecurity infrastructure and your whole program as a whole are generally what I revolve around these 2 pieces of software. So there's Multigo that I will use to map a network and build graphical maps, track employee user access rights, It's extremely versatile. It allows me to collaborate with team members to make sure that we're applying remediations to the things that we've identified. And then there's also Nessus, which I use for vulnerability scanning. Nessus covers everything for me, whatever cloud environment we come across for the most part, any internal, external networks I can plug into Nessus. So these are the two biggest programs that I use in order to support the cyber program as a whole, but specifically the production of the cybersecurity policies and procedures manual. And again, just to give the larger scope, the idea is that we use these two products to constantly update our document, so that we have an ongoing list of what's connected to the network, how data is flowing, what vulnerabilities are alive on the network, and how we're tracking them. These two products allow us to do that and keep a live, up-to-date document. And I always like this map. If you've been to my other webinars, I'm sure you've seen it, but this kind of gives a graphical overview of really what we need to cover in the policies and procedures manual and as a cybersecurity compliance program as a whole. What you're seeing here is an intranet, or, for example, a firm's office. In that office, there's going to be an employee who's using a computer. You may have application servers or servers running in your network. You may be connecting through your router and your firewall to the internet, to a cloud database, or an email database, or an email server that you're using. And then, of course, now we have remote employees and people at remote offices. And the idea is that we need to keep a constant understanding of what this network looks like and build a graphical map of it. And I'll show you that here in a second. And then, once we have that graphical map, we can go through and start testing the different items in that network for any vulnerabilities that may be there. So, this is the overall job that we're trying to do. We're trying to understand our network, understand what vulnerability, what threat management, and what intrusion detection we need to be doing, and then putting that all into a policies and procedures manual. So before I even start with the policies and procedures manual, I build just a graphical map of the network. And these dots up here, if I were to zoom in, these dots would contain different pieces of information about the network. And if you've seen other webinars, you've seen me work with this. But this typically gives me everything I need to know about what's connected to the network, how data is interacting, and what software is on that network, what's updated, what's patched. This really gives me a full view of the network. And the graph that you're seeing here was produced using Maltego. So we can use Maltego to produce this graph, and then we can easily export it to a PDF if we need to apply for cyber insurance, or we're going through a security examination. We can easily put this into PDF. But this is your first step. Understand what's on your network, understand how things are flowing, and where the client and sensitive data may be. So one of the items they specifically focus in on is doing the risk and threat assessments. And this is how I like to frame it for our clients, because we honestly don't have a lot of information from the SEC about how we should be framing it. So when I'm first engaging with a client, we say, you're really trying to protect two things. One is data, whether it's the firm's data, whether it's the client sensitive data, and assets. Making sure money does not go missing or go to an unauthorized third party. That's the name of the game. Those are the two areas that we're trying to protect. And we're trying to protect that on many different fronts. We have the office. We want to make sure we have a secure network at the office, and that our employees aren't doing anything to leak sensitive data, or doing anything and getting phished and sending out wires to where they shouldn't be going. We have to deal with the custodians and brokers. Luckily for a lot of you guys, you have your assets at Schwab or TDA, Fidelity, whatever the case may be, and you really don't have custody, other than for technically billing or whatever the case may be. You really don't have custody. So honestly, that alleviates a lot of problems when you think about it. If we can say, hey, we trust Schwab and we trust our employees to do what we're supposed to, we have a pretty solid plan to keep assets in place, which is very important. A lot of you guys are using managed service providers for your IT or for different technology that might be going on in your office. There's a reason we don't offer those services. It's because it's extremely difficult to do in a compliant manner. We're going to talk about in a little bit, there's a golden rule in cybersecurity. The more convenient something is, the less secure it is. And MSPs and these outsourced IT providers generally always err on the side of convenience because they're trying to apply a solution to many, many different firms just like yours. And so a lot of times security is wide open. So when we come in and do audits on these type of firms, those are the type of holes we're looking for. We're looking for what shortcuts they've taken so that they can say, hey, we're either going to fix it or the firm can move on and find someone that's willing to protect their network in a correct manner. So that's a big issue. A lot of people think that hiring an outsourced IT company alleviates the problems. Quite honestly, when I know I have a client coming in that does have a managed service provider, I know I'm going to have generally a ton more vulnerabilities to go back to them with. And now, of course, we're dealing from work from home, which was kind of a strange one on the compliance side because we really don't have a lot of case history or looking at examination requests for what the SEC wanted to see from for the work from home individuals. So for the most part, you still kind of apply the same thing, making sure we're monitoring those networks, they're not insecure, and that sort of thing. In here, I just have a quick snippet. Again, we've done several webinars on doing threat and risk assessments and how we use Maltego to do that. So I highly encourage you to check those out on the SEC YouTube channel if you haven't seen them yet. But here's just a quick kind of a snapshot of what we're wanting to do. One of the things that I'm big about doing is when I'm engaging with a firm, we'll take everyone's email address and run it through a database and find any known breaches, public breaches that these individuals or these email addresses may have been lost in. There's public repositories you can do this in, like Have I Been Pwned? And then personally, I have a little over 8 terabytes of data that I also collect and that we go through. What we're wanting to do with this threat assessment is, let me step back for a second. If there's a hacker that's coming after your firm, the first thing they want to do is understand how much publicly available information is out there about your firm. In other words, what public breaches have you already been involved in? Did you order from Drizzly during COVID and now your driver's license is leaked out on the dark web? Have you lost usernames and passwords before? These are all things we want to know. So in this example, we took the email address john.doe@gmail.com. ran it through the filters, found it was involved in, 10 different breaches, 11, something like that. Different breaches, Bonobos, which is a clothing store, Adobe, there's Audi USA. You'll usually see Park.io. There's a lot of LinkedIn. There's just a lot of breaches that you'd be familiar with that you might have signed up for your work address. So if I can take John Doe at ABC Financial, and this is the guy I want to attack, and I can go through and I can look for public information. And now I have his driver's license, I have his social security number, what type of vehicle he drives, his password hints, historical passwords, his passwords. And now I'm looking at this data and I'm looking at John Doe and I have all these past passwords and he uses password 123, password 321. It's pretty easy for me to figure out how to get into this guy's account. The beautiful thing about this from the hacker's perspective is I haven't had to touch any sensitive server. I've gone to just publicly available information to collect this. I haven't had to hack anyone. I haven't had to phish anyone. So this is a great way to kind of leverage the attack. So this is the type of stuff I'm looking for in a threat assessment. I want to know if you've shared a PDF on your website and accidentally left the username and credentials in the metadata. I want to know what's been lost with that firm, so that we can understand and make sure we go to the employees and say, hey, you were compromised in such and such breach. This information has been out there. Here's the importance of why we have to be using random passwords, long, difficult passwords, and using two-factor authentication. So. One of the other topics they want to see is individual, employee, and user access rights. And I also use Maltego for this. You can see in a little example, this is how I would track this in Maltego, which again would ultimately pipe in my cybersecurity policies and procedures manual. With just a click of a button, I'll have this in PDF that I can put into that exhibit or that appendix, whatever you'd like to call it. But ultimately here, very simple map. We can take the company Vela Ford, which owns the domain velaford.com. And on velaford.com, there is securevelaford.com, which is where we keep the most sensitive information, the recipe to Coca-Cola, etc. And Vela Ford has an employee named John Doe. We have his email address, which we used in our threat assessment a minute ago, and we have his cell phone, which of course is going to be monitored under our mobile device management policy, and we would make note of that here, again, to pull it into that manual. And then this dotted line, I'll show you this dotted line in more detail, what this dotted line actually means, but this allows us to track what is John's access to this different system. And we can see here he has admin access. We could extrapolate this out, and let's say we also had events.velaford.com that the event planner used to invite the most important VIPs to the company's meeting. Well, John Doe is a trader. He probably shouldn't have access to that information. So we would have a solid line going there showing that he does not have access to that information. And that's a very simple way to use Maltego to quickly track that throughout the firm. What you're seeing right now, obviously, is a very simple example. When we start adding in 20 and 30 employees across 10 to 15 different systems that contain personally identifiable information, this starts to zigzag really fast. But again, having all this data in one place, it allows us to pipe it in and keep that policies and procedures manual up to date. Information asset and asset protection protocols and procedures. This can go down so many different wormholes, and it's going to be so dependent on the type of firm that you are, what kind of infrastructure you're working with, just a host of different things. It gets back to the problem of why you can't have a templated approach to this. But I do want to focus on a couple golden rules. As I mentioned earlier, inconvenience equals security. The more inconvenient data is to access, technically speaking, the more secure it is. And two-factor authentication solves 99% of your problems. I got a call yesterday from a gentleman, past client, who had his email spoofed, and when he moved to Office 365, they didn't set up the email correctly. Two-factor authentication was missing. These are big problems. These are stuff that we have to get a hold of. If you have a breach and it's on an account that you didn't have two-factor authentication on, you're going to be racked over the coals. Your cybersecurity insurance is most definitely not going to pay for anything. So two-factor authentication solves 99% of your problems. I know it's a pain, but it really does. On the right, there's kind of like a rack of what's the most secure versus what's the most least secure. So looking at a token-based 2FA like a YubiKey or something like this are going to be your most secure. And then, of course, sharing passwords around the company is going to be your least secure option. And then there's everything in between. So, a lot of firms need to figure out where they fall on this scale. I think at a minimum, we need to be at a 3 or higher. I really can't think of a situation where we would be at less than a 3 on here. So something to think about. This is one, let's see if we can get this graph going here. Apologize, guys, getting the slides out of order here. So I always like to show this. This was always my setup with two-factor authentication. So I spent the first 10 years of my life managing trade desk and operations for different hedge funds and RIAs. And for my hedge funds, this was basically the route I would set up. So I would divide the employees into several different classes. I'd have class admin. So these would be principals of the firm, people who have access to all systems. I would have a class 2 and a class 3. These were individuals that had access to cashiering and trading and or personally identifiable information. And then I had a class 5, or excuse me, a class 4. And these were individuals who maybe had access to personally identifiable information, but for the most part, we tried to keep them separated. And then the way we would think about it, so, I would have the different programs. So for instance, a CRM, financial planning, and our trade management software where we knew we had sensitive information. And we would set up the different admin accounts here. So class admin had a YubiKey and an admin password manager that they would use to monitor the entire firm. So these are going to be your CCOs. The CCO should have the skeleton YubiCo key. The CCO should be able to go to any system, put in that YubiKey, and have access to do CCO type things like collect data that we're talking about in the policies and procedures manual. So I would always have a skeleton key for my class admin. For my class 2 and my class 3, my employees that were especially my employees that were trading and coming in, whether it was managed futures trading, whatever they were doing. For one, we had a policy that no one traded at home, no one did any work from home. So here is, this is back when everyone was in the office. But we had a YubiKey, and that was how they accessed the trading platform. When they came into the office, they picked up their YubiKey. When they left the office, they turned in their YubiKey, which prevented them from ever having access at home. And so that was the most secure way for me to protect those assets and to make sure that our trading platforms were secure. And then, of course, for my class 4, oftentimes I would let them just use an app-based or an SMS-based two-factor authentication and not have to have a YubiKey. So I'd let them take a step down a little bit and not have such a secure regiment. But thought I would share that, just how I set it up. For me, it worked very well. We had 5 traders in the office. Literally behind my desk, I'd have the YubiKeys on the wall. So it was easy for me to monitor each day and keep an eye on. So let's jump to cybersecurity and threat vulnerability management. For this, I used the program Nessus that I was talking about. And again, if any of you guys have a less expensive solution than Nessus, I'm certainly would love to hear about it. But for me, Nessus solves a lot of problems. I've really never gone into a client where I couldn't take Maltego and Nessus and solve every problem that I found in terms of doing vulnerability work and compliance work, cybersecurity compliance work with that particular client. And so I have no reason to speculate that you as an individual couldn't take these two and build a complete program yourself. I'm pretty positive it'd fit what you'd have to do. What you're seeing here on the screen is the dashboard for Nessus. So Nessus is deployed inside the network. I can go and I can set up basic network scans to scan my website externally, to scan my email externally, to scan internally, making sure everyone's got updated and patched systems, making sure remote desktop connection isn't open. And as you can see, there's a lot of different modules that we can go through and scan. If I have information in the cloud with Azure or AWS or Salesforce, it's easy for me to do a cloud audit and make sure that that's set up securely and that data is not leaking out. So Nessus is just one of those go-to tools. It's expensive, but it's extremely effective and really just being a one-stop shop for everything you need in terms of cybersecurity and threat management. And this slide shows you kind of what this would look like inside the Nessus platform if you were to click on the network scan and do a network scan. These different lines would be the different hosts or the different computers or systems that were connected to the network at the time of the scan. And then here is a list of the number of vulnerabilities that we're working on for each node. This is pretty typical. This is typically what the workload looks like, especially if we've gone into a firm that hadn't been updated in a few years. You're going to find quite a few of these. At the top, it allows us to track each vulnerability and the remediations that we're working on. Again, the idea is that we have Nessus running in the background. We can set this up. We can schedule it to run once a week and send a report to the CCO, and just constantly have those reports updated and saved, so that in the event that we do go through an examination and we pull out our cybersecurity policies and procedures manual, and the examiner turns to the section on security and threat vulnerability management, he can then go to the appendix and see a very fresh document that shows that we're constantly monitoring this. So that's really the way, Nessus working in the background, again, it just allows us to pipe all of that information into the policies and procedures manual. Here is a quick scan we did of an AWS environment. A client had some data in an AWS environment. So, a lot of clients that I talk to, they have this idea that they put their data in the cloud and it's, secure. There's nothing they need to do. And I always tell them, my translation of that is, you told me that you just took your most sensitive data and put it on someone else's computer that you can't monitor, you can't analyze, you can't detect intrusions, you can't secure it. So that's a big problem. So, putting data in the cloud is not an easy solution. In fact, it actually complicates things because then we have to go and we have to take the cloud configuration and make sure that it's set up correctly and that we're not leaking data on the back end. If you do a quick search for one of the leading financial advisor CRMs, you'll see where they lost a lot of client data on the back end. And it was for this exact reason. They didn't secure their cloud, and literally every bit of client data that was being put into that CRM was just bleeding out on the back. So, I think 20649 will definitely, hopefully, have firms step up and prevent that type of thing from happening. And so here, this kind of rounds us out a little bit too in terms of how we manage the threat and vulnerability management. So here you can see, again, back to a Maltego graph. And in this particular Maltego graph, we've taken the scan that Nessus has done, and Nessus has piped that scan into Maltego so that we have a visual map of what it scanned. And again, we can push this to PDF and tuck it right into that policies and procedures manual. In this instance, you can see this was a scan of Dunder Mifflin, the Scranton branch. We only scanned 2 machines. One is a scanner and one is a machine that belongs to Pam at dundermifflin.local. And at Pam's machine, we see a big bomb here. That was a vulnerability that we discovered. So within Maltego, this live document that's attached, we now can show where we're doing our patch management, we're updating our systems, we're making sure they're secure, and we're also collaborating and making sure that we're on top of these vulnerabilities. And that's really the name of the game. We want to show that we're being proactive, that we're monitoring the network, that we're finding vulnerabilities and addressing them. At the end of the day, I always go to the example, you take the FBI and the CIA and the NSA. These are companies with unlimited talent and essentially an unlimited budget, and yet they still get hacked. So you can only do so much, but what we have to have is that evidence that we're doing something, that we are actively tracking these vulnerabilities and going through. And I promise you, just doing something, just doing these scans and taking care of these small problems will fix the big problems that could come down the road. Here is another example too of kind of how we would, I don't see any, yeah, so there's no vulnerabilities on this one, but this is, here you can take that secure.velafor.com location, and here we've done a scan of it, and we can see all of the different information that is on that particular domain. We have some databases, we have some open ports running and some different servers, we have an Nginx web server running. So, again, we just want to map what's going on and making sure that these are up to date. And Maltego is how I do that. So there's a response and the recovery game plan too. Again, if you want to put this in your general business continuity plan, or if you want to have this in your separate cyber policy, I think that's fine. But essentially, it's talking about kind of the first step is preparing, right? Doing your process and tools, your risk assessment, closing the gaps and mapping infrastructure. That's all stuff that we just talked about. So make sure you're doing that prep work and understanding what that actual network looks like for you and what we're actually defending. It's extremely hard to defend something that you don't know what it looks like. And then there's, of course, the triage. What data is at risk? What's the likelihood of an attack? If I have two web servers and they both look vulnerable and one belongs to your CRM and is leaking data and the other one belongs to your printer and is leaking how much black ink you have, even though we have the same vulnerability, we know which one is more likely to be attacked and which one's more important. So, even when you have your network, understand what's important. Maybe we're not going to protect printers as much as we are the cloud CRM. And then of course, have some procedures for containing. When the employee raises the flag that they phished, make sure you have some policies and procedures to unplug whatever that device or that employee is from the network, assess the damage, make sure you're blocking any C2 domains, command and control domains that may have taken over. And sometimes you just have to do a slash and burn, where we just re-image the device and go back to a time where we know the device was safe, which of course, just kind of rounds back out to that policies and procedures. And it's not one that we touched on, but making sure you have a backup system in place and a way to back up all of this data is extremely important. And then, of course, remediate. How are you going to remove that attacker? How are you going to apply the security patches? And again, how are we going to reimage those disks? And then there's the cybersecurity awareness training. Toot our own horn here. We have a product called Fieldcraft that's absolutely excellent at this. Employees spend about 45 to 60 minutes throughout the year going through some training. If you have less than 10 people, it's free. We have a free version that you can use. It's a little bit limited. And then if you need the full version, it's $5 an employee. But this covers everything, the phishing risk assessments, figuring out if employees can figure out phishing emails, and then, of course, kind of educating them on the 8 cores of privacy, mobile, social awareness, being out of the office, how to behave in the office, on the internet, what are the essentials of using Wi-Fi securely, and, of course, email, making sure we understand email is generally always going to be an attack vector, so we want to train employees on that. There's a ton of other solutions out there. If you already have one in place, I'm sure it's doing just fine. But, again, the idea here, the way I designed Fieldcraft is that you can go through the training. It's its own portal. And at any time, it automates it so that at any time you can just jump into that portal, click on the employee report.pdf and attach that to your policies and procedures manual. So simple product there. If you like to take a look at it, you can certainly sign up for that on the website and get a free look. Pretty easy product to use. And then record keeping, one of the last things I'll touch on. So 20649 is going to stipulate record keeping for a lot of these documents, including every version of your policies and procedures. So, when you're building your policies and procedures, make sure you're doing it in a program that keeps a versioning history, or you have some kind of solution in place to keep a version history for that. Both Maltego and Nessus that I discussed with you, those will internally keep track of every scan that you do so that you can go through and show every version of these documents, what changed in them and that sort of thing. So they do a really great job of managing that. Make sure you're keeping your annual review documentation. So you do have to review this stuff annually, sign off on it. One of the things I didn't mention at the beginning, but 20649 is going to require board approval on all cyber docs. So you're going to have to designate a cybersecurity expert within your firm, whether you have one internally or you outsource it to another firm. You're going to have their written approval on all cyber docs. Cyber insurance policies. I've had several webinars on there. I'm not a fan of them. At the same time, I would never want to go through an examination without them. So make sure you have them. Your written risk and threat assessments that I showed you. Again, done in Maltego, so that will take care of the record keeping for you. And cyber incident reports. So I won't dive into it too much, but one of the things that 20649 is going to cover is a new Form ADVC. So anytime you have a compromised network or suspect a compromised network, you will now have to file Form ADVC to notify the SEC. We're also going to have to add descriptive cybersecurity language to our Form ADV Part 2A. So in both of those forms, Maltego and Nessus are going to be extremely valuable in making sure that you can produce them should you ever need to for the Form ADVC and for actually having to do it for the Part 2A. Again, I am not a fan in any way of the Form ADVC or the new additions to the Part 2A, but they are what they are. The only thing I would recommend is, taking the documents that you have in Maltego and Nessus and making sure that your attorney agrees that those are the things that you would want to put on the Form ADV. See if you do submit one. Mostly just because I'm getting a little long-winded on this, but mostly just because there is a lot of detail on there. I never like to turn over a full report without having some form of attorney look at it and make sure that's exactly what we need to put in there. So again, Form ADVC and the new Part 2A description, these two products are going to really help you with that. I guess one more reason just to kind of justify the price on them. So that's it. That's kind of my quick overview to the policies and procedures manual, and it's hard to do a quick overview, and it was actually hard to get a lot of this information in a way that I felt flowed well. With the way I've set it up and the way that I found to make this policies and procedures manual a document that's easy to work with, a document that's easy to follow and easy to update is to set it up the way I have here. So. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in. I'll stick around as long as you need to address them. And of course, if you need any help getting this documentation for your firm or getting set up, of course, reach out for that as well. And I'm happy to talk with you guys about that. So a couple questions coming in. One is, does the SEC ask if we use phishing resistant MFA? So yes, they will. I've never really heard phishing resistant MFA. I mean, MFA for the most part is going to be phishing resistant. If I were to phish you and steal your Microsoft Office 365 credentials, I have your username, I have your password, I'm still not going to be able to get in unless I have access to that multi-factor authentication or that two-factor authentication method. So yes, they definitely want to know if you have MFA. In fact, if you look through the document on my homepage where we collect, they specifically ask which systems do you not have MFA on. So they are, it's certainly a big issue. Again, having multi-factor authentication solves 99% of all cyber problems out there. So they're definitely going to demand that you have that. Just the other thing, I mean, it's always a bad conversation to have, but think forward. If you do have a breach and you do have data that's lost, your clients expect you to have two-factor authentication on. Like if it comes out in a report that you were holding sensitive client data without two-factor authentication, that's a hard one to come back from. It's one of those things I think is expected and kind of built in. So, when I'm talking with a firm, that's the first thing we're going to correct, is making sure everyone has some two-factor authentication in there. Another question is, what was the site you were doing the email search for vulnerabilities? So I use a couple different ones. I have a little over 8 terabytes internally. And then the public one that I like to use is called Have I Been Pwned? PWNED. Have I Been Pwned? You can go on to Have I Been Pwned and one by one type in the email addresses and it'll show you all the breaches that you have. It does what's the word? It does hide the sensitive data. So it would tell you, hey, your driver's license was lost, but it's not going to show you a copy of your driver's license. But it gets you the same idea, and shows you what may be out there. So it's a free website as far as I know. I use the API on the back end and have a subscription, but I do believe they have a free access on the front site. So Have I Been Pwned is the name of it. Where could we find information on the public databases? You mentioned searching for compromised emails and passwords. Yep. So kind of same question there. There's Have I Been Pwned? That's a good one. There's others out there. I've never really spent too much time on them just because I was more focused on collecting them internally to make sure we had a lot of databases that we could look at and go back with specific information. But there's several out there. Have I Been Pwned? I think is probably one of the most well-known out there, and I think used pretty pretty significantly. One of the nice things about Have I Been Pwned is there is an extension inside that Maltego product. So if you're inside the Maltego and you type in an email address, it'll automatically go and pull that for you. So that is kind of a nice thing to do with that information. If you keep it in Maltego and decide to go that route, it makes updating that and doing those searches, a 15 to 20 second ordeal. So super easy on that. Another question is, do I have any favorites for two-factor authentication? So I'm a big YubiKey guy. I love having YubiKeys. I have a YubiKey that I use for just about everything, and especially for my sensitive databases. And then for ones that I'm okay with them not being fully protected, and I say not being fully protected, not being is securely protected. And having a YubiKey is a pretty secure method. A lot of times I'll go to an app-based two-factor authentication on there. So, really, I've never come across a real-world situation where I've ever seen a YubiKey be compromised or even an app be compromised where I've never been involved in one, but the ones that I've heard about would have involved some form of robbery where, the cell phone or the app was taken. So, in general, I'm a big fan of YubiKeys. I think for $40 or whatever they cost, you can't go wrong with them. Ultra secure. And if you're not familiar with a YubiKey, this one question that just came up. If you're not familiar with a YubiKey, it's a device. It's like a small USB drive, and the way it works is when I go to sign in to Microsoft, I would type in my username and my password, and then it would ask me to insert my YubiKey. So you just take your YubiKey and insert it into the UPS drive, and they have them for USB-C and for the Lightning for the iPhone, a bunch of different connections, but you just plug it in. And then you push a physical button, and pushing that physical button is your multi-factor authentication. You can have the username and password, but if you don't have someone pushing that button physically, you're never going to get in. Another question is, can Windows 11 use a YubiKey for logging in? That's a great question. I'm not a Windows user, and I haven't kept up. I know since Windows 10, Microsoft has introduced a bunch of different versions and things like that. I would have to place a solid bet that you could use a YubiKey for that. I can't say definitively, but I would place a solid bet that you could. Now, whether you have to have a certain version, like it doesn't work on home, but it works on enterprise, that may be an obstacle you use. But yeah, I'm assuming it's there. I highly encourage you to use it. I use it for logging into my OS, my email. Pretty much everything you can put on one YubiKey, which makes it pretty nice. So. All right, guys. Well, that's all the questions that I have. Of course, I recorded this. I'm going to get it wrapped up, and I will get it sent out to you guys if you want to go back through it. If you guys need to get in contact with me, feel free to reach out to me through email or phone, or you can set an appointment on our website. I'm certainly happy to have a chat with you about any issues you might be having. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me for these calls and hearing what I have to say and letting me share, what I've kind of found in the field. And I definitely appreciate your feedback. If you guys are, seeing things that I'm doing or know about different software or things that you're doing internally, I'd love to hear about them and share them with the community and share them with you guys for how others might be doing this work. But ultimately, I hope today brought some value to you and showing you how I approach this and some of the tips and tricks I have. Again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a fantastic day.